Но обраната публика е тук. Така, днес продължаваме по каналния ред, както се казва, в двете зали. Оттатък е Елена Павлова, тук са Юн Макдоналд и трима designated writers, така нататък. Както се казва там на английски.
Glorified.
Glorified and well known. Всеки момент ще започне и записа. Само да призова, ако има хора, дето не са се регистрирали, не са си взели там мерчендайза, нали, значките и прочие, да го направят. И това е. Караме си по програма, всичко е точно. Така, значи тук не знам, някой ще вземе ролята на водещ или какво ще правите? Окей. Всички ли имат вода?
Да.
Значи Мария вече е дала. Добре тогава. Пек, и аз ще около. Запис.
Okay, welcome dear guests and friends. I was just informed that we'll leave the show this morning for you with this wonderful group of inspiring Ian. I should have left him in the catacombs of Sophia Church 2 days ago. We'll talk about ethnic sci-fi. Honestly speaking, giving the authority as a leader of the panel, I would like to expand a little bit the topic and go in all forms of science fiction, fantasy, and even my favorite, magic realism. I believe there is plenty to talk about because the world is stirring right now, and an extreme wave of new talented, aspiring writers is upon us. So there is a lot to explore, a lot to discuss, different viewpoints and different opportunities for some good recommendations. So our special guest, Ian, is here with us. Because of him, we need to speak in English. Hope you understand us. I'm Tрошанov. I believe you've seen me in the last 2 days anyhow. Let us pay attention to our guys here. Peев, I believe, is coming for the first time today, and he's a wonderful sci-fi writer himself. And Temo, also a friend of mine, a colleague from university, and one of the most amazing contemporary writers and translators in Bulgaria. So let us start. It's a vast topic. I would still like to start with our special and renowned guest, Macdonald, and maybe I'll ask him the following. Ian, how do you see the development of the, let us say, non-Western dominated sci-fi and fiction overall? Do you see some new trends coming up? What's your vision, and how you foresee things will go on for the near and later future?
First of all, I just say I'm sitting in this very silly way because I have a bit of a cold. I don't want to infect anyone, so I'll be holding the microphone here, speaking very loudly. So I'm kind of like in quarantine over here. A bit earlier this year, I was very privileged to be invited by the Fishing Fortress School of Science Fiction in Chongqing in China, with 6 other international science fiction writers. Two of them from India, actually both women, didn't get Chinese visas. That's, I think, said a lot about sexism and geopolitics, all the same thing. But we were international writing guests working with Chinese writers on a week-long residential school with a big cash prize, and it was a big cash prize at the end, for new Chinese writers. It was basically like the US. The idea was to model it in some way on the US Clarion West workshops, concentrating on short fiction, concentrating on writers who had a slight track record but wanted to build their career. It was an absolute privilege to be working with very, very talented people, and very proud that a woman in my group won the prize. She clearly had the best story of all. And I think what was interesting was finally we're breaking the idea that science fiction, not so much fantasy but science fiction particularly, is an American genre. That it takes an American view of the future, it takes an American view of technology and posits basically an American universe that will look like future of America. And what's exciting about things like the Fishing Fortress workshop is that, way, let there be light, is that there is a big other culture out there. There was the Chinese, there was the World Cup in China the year before. I couldn't go, I would like to have gone. But particularly what Chinese science fiction is saying is it's not all about America, and it's not all about the West, and it's not all about the Anglophone world, and I find that very interesting.
Thank you, Ian. So, Nikki, can you tell us a little bit about your writing? I believe you came up with a new book recently. Have you somehow captured these trends yourself in any way? And do you intend to do that in the future?
I would like to point out something very interesting that Ian said. And this is something I haven't quite considered, that the modern science fiction, basically in the classic one, are basically the American vision, the American style, the future of the world. But in regard to your question, I decided to make something different with two of my books. The relatively new one called Tales from the Future, and one of my other books, The Interview, which is set in 2035, 38. And the thing I did with The Interview was to imagine a world, basically a futuristic Europe, not so far in the future, maybe around 15 to 20 years, and how Europe would look. And I tried to analyze some data and interesting trends going around the whole continent. And one of the things that stood very interesting for me was that in small regions of some European countries, the governments were testing the so-called basic income. And relatively, if you work or not, this does not make any difference. You just receive some amount of money to get by. And this is one of the basic premise, the background that is basically the novel is running in the background, this theme that people aren't actually need to work anymore, and what will happen in Europe in that case. Fast forward maybe a century, this is the story about Tales from the Future, and I decided to implement the same basis from The Interview, but develop them in about a century later, including the inclusion of robotic parts, basically human and machine coming together, and we all get back to the point that you made, that sooner or later we will get to the American point of view for the future.
Thank you, Nikki. Now, Emo, I have a special question for you before we fly into the different realms of science fiction and fantasy. I know for an absolute fact that you're cinema freak because you and Blagoy are the guys who I believe have watched more than 10 or 20 times more movies than myself and any regular person alive. So I would like to explore a little bit with you the trends in the different forms of art as well, because you know that they derive from one another. Can you share whether there is some expansion of ethnic cinema, of cinema from different realms of the world that is providing new ideas, new visions, and can you connect that also to the other forms of art, to the books, to the comics, and everything else that is part of the contemporary pop culture?
Thank you, that's a very good question. It's a very interesting question. Yes, I am a cinema freak, I'm a film freak, film nerd, and of course, you know, Hollywood is one small part actually, and Nollywood and Bollywood produce more films, each on its own, than Hollywood, and Bollywood is of course the Indian film industry, and Nollywood is the Nigerian film industry, which actually leads the world in terms of number of movies. And of course, there's been an explosion in Chinese cinema, especially Chinese science fiction cinema. And people underestimate science fiction in cinema. They have always underestimated science fiction in cinema. But if you look at the top 10 highest grossing movies of all time, I think 7 of them are either science fiction or fantasy. Because, you know, all the Marvel movies are basically science fiction. If you, well, it's not hard science fiction, but it is science fiction, as much as Star Wars is science fiction, for example. And of course, fantasy has had an amazing renaissance after The Lord of the Rings. Before Peter Jackson's trilogy, fantasy was a dirty word in cinema, and now it's a money-making machine. And well, things have calmed down recently, but at one point it was the genre in cinema. Yes, the world is getting flatter and flatter, and by that I mean that everyone can play. It doesn't matter where you're from, it doesn't matter your background. You can plug in and you can create something, and it can be picked up by Netflix, for example, in Poland, or in Mexico, or in Iceland, in Bangladesh, and they can create an original show, an original movie, and it can become a huge international hit, because, you know, some streaming services are completely global, which means that they have reach and they popularize types of science fiction that are, you know, unfamiliar in, for example, in Bulgaria. I was very interested, for example, last night I googled Brazilian science fiction because I will be visiting that country next year, and there were hundreds of TV shows, movies, novels that most of them still haven't reached these shores, but maybe someday. And this is very encouraging. I completely agree with Ian. This is a great phenomenon, the way that, of course, I have to say that his perspective is a little bit different than our perspective as Bulgarians, because in Bulgaria, science fiction was broadly divided into American or English-speaking science fiction and Soviet science fiction, and they were quite different from each other. I think my Bulgarian literature teacher in high school did an amazing class one time, which was inspired by science fiction, and he talked about the difference between the two main types of science fiction popular in Bulgaria. And he said that English-speaking science fiction is the science fiction of ideas, and it is mainly plot-driven, whereas Soviet science fiction is more esoteric, more abstract. It's more about the characters and the internal worlds, and it's a bit more philosophical in a way that can be a little bit hard to grasp. I think most of us have read some of the Strugatsky brothers' books, which are unbelievable, but you can't quite figure out why they're so brilliant, because you cannot get half of what they mean, and the other half just like goes over your head. But it's very refreshing to, for example, to see the explosion that the three-body problem caused, and South Korean fantasy and science fiction, especially in terms of TV. They have some amazing creators, and it is a different culture. The tropes are different. And if you have read as many sci-fi novels and watched as many sci-fi films as me, you get a little bit tired of the Western tropes, and also of the Soviet era tropes. Of course, they have their own tropes, and you crave for something different. I should not let out Japan, because when you talk about science fiction, I mean, manga, anime, they are amazing. They are on the cutting edge as always. Not only the 80s, they are still producing some of the best sci-fi in the world. And it's refreshing, and it's different, and it engages you all over again into science fiction. And also different people bring different perspectives to the genre, and it's very gratifying, because of course we three writers as Bulgarians, we are also kind of outsiders in terms of like the main trends. So maybe this is encouraging, because maybe we could bring something different to the genre, some Bulgarian mythology. For example, I have Kikimora in my sci-fi world, in my sci-fi universe, which is a Bulgarian mythological creature. So yes, that's my. I don't remember the second part of your question.
I believe you covered it pretty well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Emo. I'll share a few thoughts myself that were born during my travel here through the subway, and then get back to him, because though he's sick, we shouldn't treat him too kindly. He's here to speak to us. So you made a very good bridge, honestly speaking, and I was giving it the same thought. The world was for 40, 50 years dominated by the collision between West and East, and I would say we were encapsulated a little bit, because freedom made it easier to expand and explore new realms of fantasy and science fiction, while the socialist culture was more dominated by the socialist realism kind of thing. Though in USSR there have been very good sci-fi novels especially, and this is also driven by the contest in the expansion in the cosmos, and also the Russians are traditionally very good at rockets and rocket launching, so the science fiction of those days has been much related to the tropes of exploration, new worlds, and not so much of a virtual reality kind of thing that we are observing and seeing nowadays. But even in the Western world, there has been some writers that have literally been deeply into the worldwide mythology, such as my favorite Roger Zelazny. So he has been literally taking advantage of all the major mythologies of the world, Egyptian, Indian, and of course Scandinavian, etc. So his works look and feel different and much versatile. And nowadays what we see, in my mind, it can be divided into many different subcategories. And sometimes even part of the Western European or transatlantic space can be very different if it's not an author from Britain or from the USA. Practically, in some cases we talk about different toponyms and different speculative historic scenarios, such as, for example, German Daniel Kehlmann and Till, which is a new read of the Till-Uhlenspiegel legend. A very interesting read that goes and explores the 30-year war in Europe, but through the lenses of fantasy as well and magic realism. What to say about Safon and the view of the Barcelona, which is in his tetralogy for the graveyard of the lost books. Amazing storytelling, amazing style, and again very different touch and feel than what we used to read. The same can be said for the French authors, like for example Serge Brussois. So this is my highest recommendation of something really different as a style, as a thinking, as a way of imagining things. And of course the silk fantasy and science fiction, the Far East is getting much ahead, both economically and practically from every aspect of the world, even science. So we have the Liu Cixin, of course, we have the Ken Liu, Deng Jiang. I'm not certain all of them are Chinese, but definitely they have Chinese origin in some form. And they're one of the most advanced and beloved names of contemporary hard science fiction. And just a mention of Indonesian author Eka Kurniawan, which I love also very much, with Beauty is a Wound. And this is very interesting perspective that you could see the way Asian cultures, for example, envisions dead people. You can see this even in The Wind-Up Girl of Paulo Pachacuti, who is American, by the way, but still exploring a sci-fi Taiwan. And you can see in the Eka Kurniawan Beauty is a Wound, when the dead people are part of the scenery, they go around like ghosts and interact with the people. And something else I noticed in Indonesian scenes and landscapes, the people are so much closer to Bulgarians than to the typical heroes in the Western books. So there is plenty of opportunities. I just named a few. Give them a shot and take advantage of the beautiful diversity we have in the literature nowadays. And I'll get back to Ian now and ask him, Ian, what do you think actually will happen, considering that we have kind of a multipolar world right now? If the last 20, 30 years were highly dominated by the United States, now we have the China, the Russia standing up. It's even more complicated than the bilateral world of the Cold War. So maybe there will be new centers of power, new centers of culture, etc. Are you positive about what is taking place? Do you see some dangers in that? What is your vision for the future of our genres, having in mind those geostrategic directions?
This is so ridiculous. It's like Chairman Mao's done 1,000 flowers bloom at 1,000 schools of thought prevail. I think anything that breaks up the Anglophone hegemony is a good thing. And we haven't even started talking about African science fiction and how that is similar to but different from Afrofuturism, which always strikes me as something that's coming from America to Africa and kind of being adopted at the same time being imposed on African science fiction writers. We haven't talked about Indian science fiction. I was I was privileged enough to be invited to the Bangalore Literary Festival about 5 years ago. And there's a lot of science fiction being written in India by very good writers, and a lot of them have the advantage, and this is going to be my key point, that a lot of them can write in English. There aren't any dedicated science fiction lines or publishers in India, so science fiction and fantasy books get pushed out under general imprints, so they're kind of sneaking them out, like Samizdat, this kind of thing. But the thing that holds back global written science fiction is translation. That's always the problem, that's always the cost. And it's difficult to get stuff. It's expensive to do. Good translation costs, and bad translation is terrible, will put you off for life. What you were saying about films and the amount of films coming out of Nollywood made me think maybe that there are other countries, other nations may have different ways of expressing science fiction. Because we're all old farts here, we think it's books, which is great, but maybe there are other ways of doing science fiction ideas. You know, manga, we talked about, you know, comics, graphic novels, film. It can be cheaper to make a film than it can be to publish a book. I was reading that 28 years later, it was 28 days later, 28 weeks later, the new and 28 years later, the zombie films, that was all shot on an iPhone 5. Now, they have to do the sound. You can't do good sound on an iPhone, so they have to have professional sound for that. But you can shoot, you can script shoot, record and edit on domestic material these days, and that makes kind of low budget, imaginative, shot on the fly science fiction films a very interesting proposition. I've forgotten his name. He directed Rogue One, English director.
Edward Sam?
Yes. And he did his very first film.
The Creator.
He did The Creator as well. It's a terrible film. It's very
Awful.
Awful film. It is, yeah. It's basically
Nothing to do with science fiction.
No, it's basically blow up the Death Star. His very first film.
Gareth.
Yeah, Gareth Edwards' very first film was, what's it called? Something like Strangers or something it's called. Did it on a very low budget. It's basically this kind of alien life has landed in Mexico and is colonizing Mexico and turning Mexico into this alien landscape. It's a great film, but he did all the special effects himself on a laptop and they look fantastic. And it's that kind of level of stuff people can do at home now. And though I say so myself, with AI assistance, you can do fairly sophisticated high-end stuff on very little money. And I'm wondering if, because reading is not that many people read, not that many people have books, and because books are difficult to produce and expensive to produce and translate and sell, I wonder if there are other ways of doing it. Maybe comics, maybe more visual media, maybe film. There may be other ways for global science fiction to express itself.
TikTok videos.
Thank you, Ian. Now we'll get back to Nikki. Nikki, I heard has a question to Ian as well.
I'm going to look this film up, hang on.
Okay. But before that, Nikki, now let me ask this. Let us be a little bit, how to say that, try to explore the contemporary trends. Now, do you have the feeling that in the Western, the culture around English as a maternity language, so to say, the movies that are produced, the books that are written, are somehow in the recent years following certain trends, political or social, etc. And do you believe in certain aspects they sound a little bit the same? And how do you expect this appearance of new types of fiction from different corners of the world to change this. This is, of course, taking shape or taking place according to you. And, of course, then you can ask you what your intention.
Well, thank you for the question. So, new is kind of relative in regard that the world is very different since the time when those main franchises were just little specks in the entertainment industry. Basically, if we decide to separate maybe the entertainment industry before the 2000s and after, we'll see that many of the books, the stories, movies were kind of original because everyone tried to make something new, to carve to make his own way, to leave his own mark somewhere in this very difficult industry. Of course, the limitations back then were technology. And getting back to what Ian said, nowadays you can basically make a great movie, regardless of the genre, even with your phone in your hand. And the entertainment industry now, all over the world, with the inclusion of internet, the high-speed internet, basically, makes the exchange of ideas and visual styles very easy to reach out, to grab, to experience. And when something is searched for by the audience, it is starting to generate interest, and what's generating interest basically starts to generate revenue and money and fame. So basically all the seven senses are getting involved, and if, for example, originality and standalone productions were one of the things that were peak entertainment before the 2000s, nowadays we can see that the main thing is this will make money? This is the first question when a product arrives at the investor's office. Investors, it can be a movie studio, it can be a publishing house, everywhere. So I'm sure that you know many talented, gifted authors that struggle to be published by big publishing houses, and this is because they don't want to make such risks. As Ian said, publishing a book can be and will become increasingly expensive, and when you invest such funds in a product that you don't know if will it generate revenue, will it pay back, it's a risky investment. No one wants to lose nowadays. So basically, the entertainment, the focus of the industry shifted towards will this sell, will this reach bigger audience? Then how about we make something original and experiment with it for a bit? This is my opinion on the subject, but something interesting I want to ask Ian, since maybe a couple of weeks. So Ian, I decided to look at all of your books and see what kind of different genres you experimented with, what you wrote basically, and I found very interesting and very different styles and stories that you engage the readers with. how, this is the question basically, how you get from Luna, basically, moon, great level, and then we have a great trilogy which is culture based in India, in Turkey, and basically how does a writer make such jumps? Because I read an interview with you, and you said that when you start to write, you experience the themes in your books first. You want to learn from first hand, basically, so the reader could be absolutely involved to be very informed about the subject. How do you make such jumps from a moon, for example, to this cultural science fiction?
How do you jump from the moon to Kapola Church?
It's because they're all the same book. When I started writing, actually even before River of Gods, which is set in India, even before that I had a book called Necroville, which is basically nanotechnology can resurrect the dead, but you have to work to pay it off. But I'm always writing about developing economies, whether that is the working dead in Los Angeles or very near future Turkey or on the moon. The moon is basically Bali. It's this big boom economy in a very harsh environment. So ultimately what I'm writing about is developing economies in a very rapid process of change. And that's kind of what interests me about it. But it's all the same stuff. So it's really deep down. It's developing economies and change.
Thank you, sir. So we're at the top of the hour. Do you have any questions, guys?
Shall.
Okay. My question is because the topic was generally about ethnic science fiction and probably the mythological look on science fiction. Then in the present times we have a great cultural mixture and a loss of the original context of each mythological image. So, do you think this can be positive in some way? And what positive sides of this, this commercialization and superficialization of the mythology do you see?
Thank you. I believe this is pretty much also related to what Nikki said. You did not specify to answer your question, so I'll turn to Emo for this one.
There's nothing wrong with commercialization. I think that when a mythological creature is used in whatever context, in a sci-fi novel or a fantasy novel, you don't destroy the original text, you don't destroy the original meaning. You just get inspired by this creature and use it in your fiction, which is perfectly fine. And that's how you popularize mythologies that are not as popular. The way, for example, Thor popularized Scandinavian mythology in the United States. Yeah, I think it's a positive phenomenon, let's say, in modern sci-fi and modern fantasy. There is a thing which I think there's a good intention behind it, but the effect it produces is detrimental, which is like some accusations of cultural appropriation if you write about mythology that is not connected with your, personal story and ethnicity and whatever. I have to say that I don't agree with that. I think I should be able to incorporate Scandinavian gods or Aztec gods in my work without feeling guilty about it, because it's all about popularizing, and it's all about getting inspired from really cool stories, because mythology is our stories that we've been telling each other as human beings for thousands of years. And I don't think in that instance commercialization is a bad thing. And it's the same with every adaptation. I'm always surprised by authors and fans who are up in arms because the adaptation of a work is unfaithful. Adapting a novel doesn't destroy the novel. You're not burning every copy of the novel and destroying the novel when you're making a movie based on that novel. There is the novel and there is the adaptation. And that's why I agree with Stephen King's point on that subject, because they constantly, The Shining excluded from this point. I guess that was too early in his career and he was very touchy. But now his philosophy is very, very cool, which is, I don't care what they do. He sells all his properties for $1, all his intellectual properties. If you want to make a movie based on a Stephen King short story or book or whatever, you need to pay $1, and of course give him some percentage of the profit. That maybe you should talk to him directly or to his agent anyway. So his point is, I'm watching a movie that's an adaptation of my work. So I don't care if it's a faithful adaptation or not. I just want to see how someone else interpreted my creation. And I think it's the same with mythology, although there is a specific creator, but it's a different interpretation. So what if it's not unfaithful? Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, whenever you sell the rights to your work, it's not yours anymore. They can do what they want with it. It is no longer your baby. It is their baby. And they can do terrible things with it. If you're lucky, you get what's known as an executive producer. Credit, yeah, which means you're basically like His Majesty King Charles III.
No power.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, you can be consultant. You have no power to change anything about it. But once it's out there, once you sign the contract, it's not yours anymore.
Thank you, sir. Okay.
Okay, so I have a question for Ian. Earlier on the panel you mentioned Afrofuturism and African science fiction, and you drew a distinction between them. Can you tell about an example or two of African fiction, science fiction, that is potentially breaking out of its home continent, or it's something that might interest the readers?
Oh, God. You always ask the difficult questions. I'm going to have you banned from this room because you just ask the difficult questions. For me, what interests me about the Afrofuturism thing, in that it does seem to come from the US, is that it transcends just written science fiction. I was talking about this in the bar last night. I confess, I like jazz. I'm a jazz fan. If you go back to the 60s and 70s and things like Sun Ra, that was Afrofuturism, Afrofuturist jazz. Likewise now, Kamasi Washington, if you look at his album covers, it's like space jazz. That's kind of part of Afrofuturism. But for me, it comes from a particularly American, West African attitude or kind of view on African science fiction, and there's a lot more. There's South Africa, there's East Africa. North Africa tends to get ignored completely because it doesn't fit the American model of what Africa is about. I haven't read an awful lot, but the guy who did the big list, Jeff Ryman, did a huge, it was an interzone over several months or years. Jeff Ryman has a big list of quite a lot of writing on African writers from all parts of Africa. Because it's not a country, it's a continent, and it's a big continent. And I think to lump things as African science fiction is as silly as saying, everything from You know, everything from Istanbul to the Bering Strait is Asian science fiction. You know, it's as silly as that. It's a, you know, there are lots of different languages, there are different cultures, different societies, and it's how each culture expresses its own, what it does with science fiction and how it makes it its own. As I said yesterday, I don't read very much science fiction, but I'm interested in what's going on. And for me, I think the thing about Afrofuturism, it's glossy. Janelle, what's her name? Janelle Murray, African-American musician, Afrofuturism. But what's actually happening in Africa is different from Afrofuturism. An awful lot of, well, not an awful lot, quite a lot of, in the US in particular, there's a lot of diasporan writing from American Asian, American African, American South Asian writers, which is a valid thing, but it's different from what's being written in China, say. Anyway, that's quite enough of me.
Thank you, everyone. I believe we need to wrap up. A round of applause for Ian, especially.
След това ще продължаваме. Кажи, че ще направим обща снимка с всички и с гости.
Казвам, че ще направим обща снимка с всички гости и присъстващи. След това продължаваме. Също така ви казвам, че ние тримата ще направим български панел в другата зала и всички готини хора са поканени да се появят там.
А останалите тук?
Да, останалите.
Okay.